One of the most common questions that I get frequently asked is, Eli, how do I get more of these first class flights? I'm tired of economy. I hate getting cramped up. I don't want to do it anymore. How do I get more first class? So in this video, I'm going to show you how I went from flying economy and usually overpaying for it, getting squeezed into seat 32B between two linebackers, to flying first class the vast majority of the time and honestly getting these seats for way less than I used to pay for these economy tickets. So that's what today's video is going to be about. Now, I am here in my kitchen because I'm grilling up a couple of these awesome looking delicious steaks, and as you'll see, it kind of looks like a bomb went off in my apartment, and that is because my fiance Bryn and I are about to go abroad on this 6-month nomadic journey, traveling all over the world, fueled a lot by the strategies I'm going to show you in this video. So if that's interesting for you, stick along and learn how to fly first class for less than economy. Okay, so the first thing you need to think about if you're going to be flying first class is that you need to be on an airline that even has first class. So we're mostly focusing on domestic travel here today. So if you're doing domestic flights and you are flying with an airline like JetBlue or Southwest or Spirit, then those airlines right off the bat, they're not even going to have a first class cabin. So in those situations, this is relevant. So the first thing you need to do is go to Google Flights or whatever your search engine is, and you're basically just going to search for the route that you need to fly and see what airlines even operate a first class flight. So the easiest way to do this is literally Google Flights. I don't like Skyscanner or Kayak or some of those other online travel agency sites. I really like Google Flights because of the flexibility it gives you. But the first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna go there and you can just click nonstop. Ideally, you should start with that and then put the filter on for first class and just see what airlines are even operating. So the main ones that are gonna have a real first class cabin for domestic travel are the big ones. You know, you're gonna see American, you're gonna see United, and you're gonna see Delta. And Alaska does have a first class. They don't have the lay flat beds, but they do have recliner seats. And then JetBlue, you'll also see, does have on certain routes, on certain aircrafts, they actually have Mint. So if you do fly a route with Mint class, which is their version of like first class, that actually is a lay flat bed. But on their smaller narrow body planes, you won't see that separation of first class. So that's going to be prerequisite number one. So you need to see if that route is even eligible. Now that brings up, maybe if you're loyal to an airline, and we're going to get into elite status here in a second, you may do a connecting flight because it's going to be first class all the way through. So that's another variable that you want to look at. For the majority of people, they don't have status where they're getting these free upgrades. So we're going to assume that you want to take the nonstop route, assuming it's available. So for example, I live here in Austin. I'm flying to San Francisco on Monday before I take a flight out to Japan. And I am flying first class on this one. And I went to Google Flights, looked what are the nonstop options. And then I made my decision from there because I knew, okay, if I have to connect through Salt Lake City, for example, to fly Delta, I don't want to go on a one stop when there's a direct option available. And for you, if you're watching this video, you're probably a business owner or someone who's pretty busy. And so doing direct flights is definitely going to be preferred, specifically for these domestic flights. You know, if you're going overseas and you need to go position to a major hub to get a first class flight on the long leg or a business class flight on the long leg, that will make more sense. But for these domestic flights, I'm always a big fan of don't worry too much about flexibility. If you, again, are a busy person, just go right for the flight that you want and stick to the schedule and the date that you're actually looking for. So that brings us to the first main way, the easiest way to get first class flights. And that is going to be to just pay for it. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, that's not a hack. That's not a strategy. And it's not, but it is a viable option. And particularly if you are someone who's maybe a consultant and you work for a business that allows you to do that, or you're a business owner and this can be a write-off for your company. Ideally, that's a great situation. Then domestic travel where you can write it off, it honestly can just make sense to sometimes pay for it. And I do this maybe half the time I'm flying domestic. And here's why. Number one, for me, I'm looking for great write-offs for the company as is because I want to just obviously reduce the tax bill. And I like flying first class and earning additional miles from that decision, which also count towards my elite status. Now, sometimes I really want to fly first class and I don't find a good points deal. And so my only option is to either fly economy or to pay for it. So in those situations, different variables to think about. For me, there's a certain budget I set for different types of trips where I'm like, okay, it would make sense to just pay for it, or maybe you book the economy ticket on points and pay for the upgrade, or maybe your company pays for the economy flight and you pay the cash for the upgrade. So if you're going to do that, booking early will help a lot, or paying for those additional upgrades from economy to business or first as you get closer, as you get to check-in, will oftentimes have some pretty good deals. So paying for it is an option, but the key here, if you're going to do this, is number one, making sure you're using the right credit card, because this is where the biggest opportunity is going to come in for you to earn really good miles, both on the purchase and from the flight, and also accrue elite status. So there's really 3 outcomes for that. Again, you're going to earn credit card points from the actual purchase. So like if you use an Amex card, let's call it the Amex Platinum, and you were using the Amex Business Platinum, for example, and you went to the Amex travel portal to book that flight, you're going to earn 5 points per dollar on airfare purchases from purchases that you make through the Amex portal. You're also going to earn, let's say it was an American Airlines flight, you're also going to earn American Airlines miles from actually sitting in the seat. So you kind of double dip, you earn both ways. Okay. And then because you booked that flight in cash, that will accrue towards your overall status. So each airline has a different program, obviously, for how they accrue for status, but that's kind of the trilogy if you are paying for it. So that brings us to the consideration of, is it worth it to pay for it and even go for status? This is such a conditional thing, meaning it really depends. If you're traveling frequently enough, if you're spending enough, and if you're actually going to hit the highest levels of status, it can make sense. But if you're not, if you're just going to get that base level of status like silver or gold for most of these major airlines, oftentimes I really don't recommend going out of your way to get status because you're just not going to see the consistent upgrades. You're probably going to do one-stop flights when you could fly direct just to stay loyal to an airline. And the benefits you're getting aren't going to be that good. And the reason I think this is really important is because most people that are going for status are doing it because their local airport hub is a major hub for one airline. So let's say you live in Atlanta and you fly Delta a lot. So you're like, well, I want to get Delta Elite status. But here's the thing. If you live in Atlanta and you can only get to base levels of status, you don't get to higher levels like Diamond, there's a lot of people who fly out of Atlanta all the time and they have Diamond status or they have Platinum status and your measly Gold status. That means you are so low in the pecking order for these upgrades, you're not going to get them consistently. So it doesn't really make sense to make a game plan where you're going to go earn status if you're only getting to those lower levels. If you can get all the way up to a status like Diamond or with United Premier 1K or with American Executive Platinum, then by all means, I think it's actually a really good plan. And that's another reason why you might actually want to pay for more of your domestic trips, because you're going to get status and then you're also going to earn points for future personal vacations, which are tax-free. All right, so the grill is heating up here. And by the way, if you're new to the channel, my name is Eli Basenda, aka Eli the Travel Guy. And I have personally been traveling and using points for about 10 years. I've also helped hundreds of business owners with our services where we basically just do this for them, help them figure out what cards to get and help them maximize their miles and status for better upgrades, better travel, and overall more bucket list trips. So if you're new to the channel, definitely check out some other videos. You'll learn a ton around how you can maximize your points for better travel as well. All right, so I'm gonna toss these bad boys on here, and that brings me to your second way to get first class travel consistently, and that is going to be through using elite status and getting free upgrades. Now, this is a continually nuanced game. The rules are always changing. These airlines love to change their policies. One year, it's about how many miles you've flown and how much you've spent on flights. The next year, it's just how much you've overall spent on the co-branded credit card. So given that there's a few major airlines that you can get status with, I'm going to give you the high-level overview on these different airlines and how you accrue status. I'm not going to go into the specific breakdowns of the different levels because that's just totally in depth for another video. But basically, for American Airlines, they now have something called loyalty points. And what you have to do with American is essentially you either need to spend or travel. And when you spend on a co-branded American card, meaning an American Airlines card that's issued by Citibank, for example, you will earn loyalty points. And when you fly with them, you will also earn loyalty points. And either way of earning these points will count to your overall total. And right now, to get Executive Platinum, which is our highest level status, you need 200,000 loyalty points. Now, for me, it really has varied. I've had different levels of American status. And in some cases, when I had gold, I was getting upgrades, which is like their base layer. And in other cases, I had Platinum Pro, which is the second from the top, and I wasn't getting upgrades. So it really just depends on the hub you're flying to and from, how busy of dates and routes you're flying. For example, flying out of Austin, it's not a major American hub, so it's actually a little bit easier to get these upgrades because you're competing with less people. If I lived in Miami, for example, though, it'd be a much different game because there are so many American flyers that have Executive Platinum. So if I was only holding gold, unless I'm flying on off-peak dates, my odds of getting an upgrade aren't that high. Okay, so for Delta, they have a similar program where it's really based off of your spend on the Delta co-branded cards. This was a recent change as of, I think, 2024. And this was a big switch because there are people that are flying a ton on Delta and they're getting like no benefits. So now it really actually is favored towards those who have high spend on Delta cards. Not even on Delta flights, but just spend on that card. So if you ran, let's say, a home construction company and you live near Atlanta and you travel a lot, then this would be like a great setup for you because maybe you're spending $50,000 a month on supplies. What you would do is you could get like a Delta Reserve card and a couple of the other cards that help hit the qualifying tiers to get to status. You would just put a lot of those expenses on there, and then you'll start to accrue Diamond status through the spend. And since you live in Atlanta and you travel a lot, you'll actually get the value back from that, from having that highest level of status. Now, again, if you're not spending enough or you're not traveling enough or you don't always fly Delta, then that doesn't make sense. So that's why it's really important to have these things right to actually get the value. Otherwise, you're better off using other cards for your spend because you can earn more points and better points instead of just Delta miles, which actually aren't that valuable. So with United, the last major US carrier here, they do have a pretty traditional setup where there's an amount of miles you have to hit flying and an amount of spend that you have to hit on the airline. So that's the more traditional model that's been around for a long time. And again, if you're flying United consistently, you live near a hub and you can actually hit the higher levels, then it's worth going for. So that's gonna be the high level breakdown on these three major programs. But here's the thing, a lot of the people that we work with, and this varies for everybody, they don't want to fly economy at all. They're like, I do not want to run the risk. So relying on an upgrade does put you in a situation where a lot of times it may not happen and you may end up just flying economy, which if that's not a big deal, maybe it's a short flight or you really don't care that much, then that's fine. But if you're someone who's been traveling for years and you're on the road a lot and you're like, I will not deal with it, I'd rather just pay for it, then if you do rely on the upgrades, then there's a chance that you end up back in economy. So that's where either just paying for it outright or following the third or fourth step I'm going to show you would come into play. Now, the last thing I'll know about status is depending on the program and depending on the milestones of what happens when you hit status, you may hit these things called system-wide upgrades or global upgrades. They have different names for them. But basically, you can apply these and get automatically upgraded from economy into first class for domestic travel. Again, depending on the program and the level, you can even do these for some international routes and go one cabin up. So these can be a great tool to use as well, in addition to relying on status. And one last myth I want to clear up that is just absolutely not true. The days of like slipping the flight attendant a 20 or talking to the person at the check-in counter and just getting a free upgrade for being kind, or maybe even saying you have a honeymoon, those are pretty far gone. Maybe if you get really lucky, there's a fluke situation, but there's no reliable methodology in 2025 or probably in the future that can predict that. So I would not bank on anything like that if you really want to continue to fly first more often. Time to check on these stakes. Let's see how they're doing. Not bad. Okay, so if you don't want to pay for your first class flights and you don't want to rely on upgrades through elite status, then what are your options? Well, this is where we enter the world of using points and miles. And there's really two main ways that you can use points and miles for first class. The first one is going to be what I call the lazy man's way. And this is the ineffective way. It is faster and easier, but it's just way less valuable than the last one I'm going to show you. And so this is going to be by going through the bank travel portal, places like Amex Travel or Capital One Travel or whatever your bank with. There's going to be a travel portal where you can basically redeem your credit card points that you earn for flights. Now, the reason I don't like these is because these have a fixed value use on the points. So, for example, if you're flying on a first class flight across the country and it's, let's say, $800. If you go to Amex Travel and redeem your points directly through there, it's going to cost you roughly 80,000 points. Now, there are certain programs within Amex or within the Big Blue Bank. By the way, I can't say their name on YouTube for affiliate link reasons, but I think you know what bank I'm talking about. But if you use Amex or the Big Blue Bank, there are certain cards that get you either a rebate or a percentage back. So you get a little bit better value than that fixed 1 cent per point value, but it's still very subpar compared to what else you can do. So the person that should do this is the person that has a ton of points and really wants to use them and doesn't care about using them at a higher value for something else. So this would mean you have a lot of points, probably a good volume of travel, or maybe not even that much travel. You just want to fly first class for the few flights you do have, and you don't have a big international trip where you could leverage these points for much better value, because that is where you're going to see better juice on these big international business and first class flights. That's where you could turn 80,000 points instead of turning it into $800. You turn it into 15, 20, $30,000. So this is the difference of using points correctly or not. And it does really come down to your preferences, but overall the rule of thumb is going to be to not use them through the bank portal unless you're in that situation where you have more points than you know what to do with and you don't really have any big international trips coming up. So if you don't want to do it the lazy man's way and you actually want to use your points more effectively, then that brings us to our last option, which is to convert your points or to book directly through the airline site. So when I say convert your points, I mean convert your bank credit card points into airline loyalty points and book through there. Now, you may already have a bunch of airline miles stacked up from your own flying that you've accrued over the years, and you can use these directly here. But generally speaking, the best strategy is going to be to earn these transferable bank points, for example, American Express membership rewards, and then transfer them if and when you need to the airline that is going to give you the best deal. Now, this is better than earning points directly at the airline because let's say you have Amex points, for example, and you want to fly on a American operated flight. Okay, Amex doesn't partner directly with American, but it does partner with Hawaiian, which has this internal partnership with Alaska Airlines, which does partner with American. So it just so happens that one of the best ways to book American Airlines flights with points is actually by converting your Amex points into Hawaiian, merging them to Alaska, and booking American. I've done this tons of times. And for example, I just flew back from speaking at an event in Miami, back to Austin, and I think it was 12,000 points to get first class. I paid $5.60. and that ticket was retailing for about $600. So if I had gone directly to Amex's site, that would have been 60,000 points. I got it for about 12,000 points. So a fraction of the cost, and even the economy tickets would have cost me more had I gone directly through the Amex portal. Now again, if I had been accruing miles with, let's say, a United card and flying United a lot, then I wouldn't have even had the option, because United miles can't be transferred into American, they can't book American because they're not partners, and they can't be transferred into Alaska to book these American flights either. So that's why it's so important to start with the cards that you earn first, because these set you up with the right points to then use more effectively. If you don't have the right cards and you have a Southwest card or a JetBlue card, or you're using a Hilton card, and all of a sudden you want to fly American Airlines first class, well, you're kind of screwed and out of luck there, because you're not really going to have any points that are effective for your trip. So that is, again, why these transferable bank points are the holy grail of the points and miles game, and why, if you follow anyone on YouTube, myself included, they're always going to say, earn these transferable bank points, because this sets you up for the greatest amount of success. So if you want to learn more about some of the credit cards that offer the best points, I have other videos on my channel that break down specifically which cards you want to get within the Amex family, comparing some of the top Amex cards and cards across other banks as well. So those are really the main options you have if you want to fly first class more consistently. For me personally, I tend to use option 4 and option 1. For me, if I find a really good deal where I can transfer points directly into an airline or into a partner airline, I'll often use those for domestic first class flights. And in the off chance that it's a really good deal that I can just pay for, then I'll just write it off on the company. I'll earn points, I'll earn elite status, and then I'll use those points for my personal vacations. So that's my breakdown, and before I leave you here, I'll give you a little bite of the steak to see how it came out. Looks pretty juicy. Let's give it a shot. Beautiful. So, see you in the next video.